Welcome to another The Art of Mixing. I am pretty tired at the moment, but yeah, it hit me a couple hours ago, and I just can't shake it off. But anyway, let's just keep going. I think I'm a bit hard on myself, and I'm pretty brutal in terms of the schedule that I put for myself. But that's okay. We're almost at the finishing line for this season, and that's the most important thing. Yeah, but I do need to take care of my health a little bit more. Yeah, I think that's been noted by myself. Anyway, yeah, I talk about that in the blog, that obsession versus taking care of yourself. Gotta have a bit of a balance. I mean, there's no balance when something turns into obsession. I mean, yeah, there's no balance there. Anyway, besides, I can probably have to cut a little bit of that together. That's a bit long. You know how we talked about in the last episode about pauses, and I was being very anal about, how having a pause is like, you gotta be careful with that, blah, blah, blah. Well, we're gonna flip all of that on its head. Yeah, so I want you to take everything that we've done with a grain of salt and always question and always be willing to flip it on their head or push these sort of so-called rules or sort of boundaries that we put on ourselves. You always want to break that. So even though I said that in the last episode, I was very sort of, pause, I did say that we also have exemptions. There's always ways that you can work with something like that, but you have to be very creative about it. In this example, we have a select amount of sort of these key pause moments. We're gonna see how powerful they can be and how dangerous they can be when you're doing a mix. I think that we've done a pretty good job at continuing the mix, but I'm gonna show you key points where you can almost just lose it if you're not careful. Creating pauses is a very great tool to use in your arsenal of mixing, but it can also be very tricky to deal with. So let me press record. Let's have a look.
Oh, I just hate being without you. It's just another thing to break through.
Okay, this is something we'll get into in a second, but I just want to really just focus in on those sort of pause moments to talk about them, and then we'll come back to what I want to share about the other parts. Okay. So you see how we just stop, right? And we're back in that silence. Okay. Now imagine if we're dancing, okay? I'm gonna mimic dancing. And we're building and like, yeah. Now, for me, looking at it from an emotional perspective, having a high level of emotional intelligence, I feel, is your strength in these situations. When we have those kind of moments where there's sort of like, it's almost like a false sort of build, and we're creating this build against anticipation, and then just, and you always have this sense of sadness, if you will. Bear with me. You can work with that. And what I mean by that is you can approach it from adding a very emotional piece next to it, okay? And I find that when you are approaching these sort of pause transitions, what I like to do is work with very progressive melodic music, very emotional music, and that helps soothe out those moments, okay? So you have these very sort of energetic builds, and then you almost have this false sort of build there's no sort of answer, and that can be a bit sort of like, you know? And to mellow that out, we give a bit of, you know, a very soft melodic piece to go with it. And that sort of keeps that pot boiling. And it keeps the tension. At least from my perspective, that's the way I am thinking about it. You can be like, you are completely bonkers. But, you know, that's just the way I'm thinking about it. Okay, and your perspective could be completely different, and that's fine. You might have a completely different approach to it. I'm just sharing with you my thought process and the way I'm approaching using these sort of pause moments. Okay, so let's look at it again. And you're waiting for it. Now, like I talked about in the previous episode, when you just finish on a song, okay, and then you're basically starting from scratch on the next one, you have to start sort of the whole thing again. You're starting with the kick, you're starting on the snares, and you're building up. It doesn't really work. What I find works is when you sort of do that sort of vinyl break and you go into a verse of another song. Okay, so you're not starting from 100% from the beginning, you're starting from a verse, so you're starting from a vocal point that helps grab the mix back. And that's what I feel saves the mix here. So we allow that pause to happen, and then we bring it back in, we're sort of releasing it back in. We allow that very melodic, and the synths, the kick, and now the vocals are going to come in.
I'm in the dark, I'm underwater, searching for a teardrop in the water.
Cool. Now, let's go over to the next one. I believe it is about here. Cool. So we have one where we've created this sort of false negative. We've created that sort of false build. We've stopped or bringing in this very emotional, melodic, progressive sort of piece, and it's coming through. It's building. Okay, and now we are again building.
Evidence again.
But it's very short, okay? So we're not putting the audience through another sort of, big build, because if we do that, then it really has to be a big sort of transition. It has to be like almost like a big room or a completely different genre of music that's heavy, that's going to hold its own weight to do something like that. So you can create another massive build, but it's really, you got to have a piece that's going to hold its own weight. And in something like this, to do that and then go into like a sort of very progressive house sort of chorus or drop, I don't think it really works. Sometimes it does, but I think you need something a little heavier. So we've created a little bit of a shorter build here.
And with us, our blood, our love.
Cool. So the synth leads come in for this main sort of chorus section of the song. And that's when I know, okay, cool, now this is where I want to transition. So we're adding effects onto that, showing that, so giving a signal that something's about to change. And then we cut. Allow that effect tail to come in. So you can hear the cut. We allow the effect tail to come in. It expands out. And then we bring in the next song. And what I've selected is a song that's progressing. Okay, Hans Zimmer is an absolute master at this. You can hear there in Dunkirk, the soundtrack for Dunkirk, when it's just, I can't remember the exact musical terminology for this, But essentially, what he's doing, he's able to make the sort of continuation of the cycle repeat indefinitely. Okay, so what I mean is that the tension is just continuous. There's a great video I watched a few years ago about this. If you look up Dunkirk, the behind the scenes or the breakdown of Dunkirk, it talks about creating this musical relationship, and essentially you're creating this tension, but it's just definitely looping, and it's just building and building and building and building. It never really has an end to it, and that's what's happening in this sort of song. So we've created this, pause. And then again, we're creating this tension. So it's similar to the aspects that we talked about in the previous one, creating these pockets of tension with these sort of pauses now. So we've created one, and then we'll create the next one. You can see how I'm approaching things, how we're sort of, in these sections, creating these little miniature sort of build-ups, okay? So we created one longer build, okay? And then we've created this pause, brought in an emotional song. Again, we're compacting that tension, compacting that hype all into this, and we're continuing that, okay? Now we create a short little build, again, working with that tension, okay? And then we, again, have another sort of pause, and then we switch into the next song. Now this song is then again continuing building it up. It doesn't really have its own sort of resolve. It's continuing giving that answer. So throughout this whole section, we're giving the call when we're never really having a resolve in the scene. There's not a resolving moment in the current time frame. We're just continually building and hyping, okay? So again, it's a melody that it's never resolving. It's continually going in circles and circles and building and building and building and building, and we're moving it, building and building and building and building until we finally give it release. And for me, in my perspective, it's not really an answer. It's not really the drop. It's just a continuation of what's been happening. We're building up that tension, but we're amping up the energy. We're amping up the beat. We're adding the kicks. We're building up to what we want to do. We're building up to that resolve. Okay? So that's one way where we can flip things on it. We can flip things on its head. I think that that's a very key thing to be willing to do. Is that even if I feel strongly about when these sort of pause moments should be put in, never should that be ingrained in. Okay, that's don't do that. Always be willing to try it out and flip it on its head. Everything we've talked about, be willing to flip it on its head and try. If I've mentioned something that's like, maybe try, flip it on its head and try doing the complete opposite, just because, something might not, be the best practice. Just give it a shot. One example is, the dubstep we mentioned, and how I talked about, being careful with, pushing the limits. It had its own sound. So even though I do feel strongly about certain things, you always be willing to give it its own sort of space and time for you to see what you like. And if you like your music pinning at -4 LUFS, then cool, that's your thing. And if you like your music to have more dynamics and stuff like that, awesome. If you like your music to have a bit of both, cool. What I'm saying is, take what I say and you put your own perspective on things and try it out, and then say, okay, cool. I agree with this, but I still don't agree with that. And awesome. That's what I want to emphasize here. I think that's really key. That's really important. The next thing I want to look here is allowing the mix to breathe. Okay? We don't always have to do something. Okay? Sometimes we need to allow the mix to breathe. A great example of this is knowing when we have a lot of information in a piece. What I mean by that is if you have the kicks, the snares, the vocals, and other stuff happening, you have some synths, okay? Sometimes leaving it alone is your best practice, okay? And there's some moments here when we do just that.
Oh, I just hate being without you. Is just another thing to break through.
Okay, let me just clarify here. So again, we're just checking with the cue, with some of the effects I want to add in, stuff like that. Is it going to work? It's not going to work. Doing this mix with elements or sort of experimenting as we go and just trying things out and being very open to just thinking as we go to keep it as genuine as possible. Sometimes you're not really sure if an effect's going to work or it isn't going to work, so you need to just really listen to it in your headphones and see if certain things work. I know that the trans effect, for example, very powerful effect, but sometimes it might not work in a certain piece. Sometimes it will. So listening to it beforehand, figuring out with your cue points if something's going to work is really crucial. And if you have your headphones, use them.
Carry the hurt I dare not speak it. Bring up the love that we're all breathing.
Okay, when we use effects, they don't have to be just for the builds. They can be for just emphasizing certain moments, okay, and creating a bit of a unique moment, a unique atmosphere, and then allowing the track to breathe, okay? What we're doing here is playing with a fader, adding a bit of a flutter, just having a bit of fun with the song. See how I mentioned that the trans effect there, very, very powerful if you're not careful. I've experimented with using very fast cycles and using slower ones. The fourth, the eighth, they seem to work the best. Any quicker than that, it seems to sort of, it's too intense.
Searching for a teardrop in the water. I can feel your shadow over me.
There you go. So you can see how we have a section where we're really pounding down with effects. We're adding, we're playing with the channel fader, we're adding other effects, we're creating an atmosphere for the transition of the first piece. A bunch of stuff is happening. And then we're also then pausing, which is an intense moment, and then we're bringing the next song. And then for me to then just keep pounding down effects in this kind of moment, it's going to be too much. It's going to be off-putting. And that's something you want to take into consideration. So sometimes it isn't about, how complex you can make something. It's about, doing what you think is best in the moment. Okay? It's very easy to make things complex. But knowing when to simplify things, knowing when just to leave it alone, that's very, very important. I look at it almost like, I see, a lot of these sort of, mixes when you have the 4 decks and it looks impressive. But very few people know how to use the 4 decks to the absolute best. And for a lot of people, it's just for show, and it just sits there. There's nothing wrong with having 2 decks, but being really good at what you're doing in transitioning between the 2, okay? And when you're able to separate yourself from wanting to show off and being confident in the skills that you know you have, then you can really push yourself forward to create art rather than trying to sort of prove something to someone else. A great example of this is Picasso. And I watched a documentary about him recently, and what I found from my perspective when I was watching is that he was constantly trying to prove himself that he was, this amazing Renaissance artist. He could do the classical, paintings and everything, and he could do a great job at being a copycat. But when he got to the point where he was, confident who he was and created his own skill and knew his own skill, then he was able to, really bend reality, bend the mold of what could be possible. And instead of having, that the vanishing point, I believe it's called, that sort of, in paintings, you have that sort of centralized point where you can, make things sort of expand and you can create that sort of distance and create that sort of depth in the picture. And when he was able to sort of, say, okay, we're gonna just, screw all that, and we're gonna have, all these wacky designs and stuff like that. That's when you're creating your own unique style. And when you look at someone like Picasso, and he is basically, some of the work looks like a 5-year-old did it. And it's absolutely genius because they have someone who has the confidence to paint the work that he wants to paint, no matter what anyone thinks. And that's why he's so unique, and that's why he became who he was, because he was able to have confidence in his own art. And he didn't even care what anyone else thought, or the fact that it looks like a kid did it. It didn't matter, because that was his perspective of what he wanted to create. That's the art in that moment that he wanted to share. And sure, in the early works, we may have required great skill and finesse. When you look at his later works, it's just, brush. It's done with such ease that you see a master work. You see someone who's confident and has, gotten to that point where, they've realized that simplicity in their work shows great mastery over any technical skill that they can, put into their work. It's about the emotions, about the feeling. When we look at from a musical perspective, we need to remember that we listen to music because of the feeling it gives us, because of the vibe it gives us, the emotion, not because the DJ did this, did that. They added all these effects in, and then oh my god, we need to look at from the perspective and add effects, create transitions, create these moments, but from an emotional perspective, from a creative, from a musical perspective, adding 3 or 4 different things together, and then doing this and doing that, cool, awesome, But if we don't create an emotion, if there's no vibe to that, I don't really see the point in it, And that's just from one artist's perspective to another. And with that sort of rant, when we take that in consideration, we create these sort of big brush strokes, and we do do this technique, do that technique, and we add this effect, and we add this, and we add that, we add this color with that color, we do this sort of Renaissance technique with this, we might add that technique, we do an old school technique like this, or we do that, cool, no worries, okay? But for me, what the key is, we're complementing, adding something, we're adding emotion to the piece, okay? So we're adding that quick fader cut. And then we're detuning the song a little bit. We're creating a different vibe to the music. Okay, and instead of being like going I'm creating that tension for it. So instead of it being just like, you know, like this, it's sort of like zoom. So instead of it being just like, you know, there, we're throwing, you know, the blue, we're throwing the red, we're getting the brush, just going you know, and just seeing what works and putting it all together, and there you go. Almost like that Weeping Woman from that Picasso. One of my favorite paintings from Picasso, the Weeping Woman. If you haven't seen it, absolutely phenomenal piece of art. Yeah. It's like, okay, cool, so we've done all this, right? And then just let it be. Just let it be.
I'm in the dark, I'm underwater, searching for a teardrop in the water. I can feel your shadow.
Yeah. You know, imagine you're drifting and you're doing all this complex stuff and then all of a sudden the sun comes out, it's a beautiful road, and you just put on cruise control and and just enjoy the space, enjoy the moment. And that's something that you need for yourself to figure out. I still struggle with that. I still have moments like, oh, I can do this, I can do that. And what I've realized, that comes from just being insecure about your own skill. You know, that comes back to that scenario of just being comfortable with who you are. You know, not comparing yourself to that person, this person. You know, there's always going to be someone better. There's always going to be someone who does that something in a different way, but no one's going to do it the way you do it. Okay, and I'm sharing with you the way I like to mix. Okay, and you should share the way you like to mix, because your perspective is different to the way I like to. Your experiences, your life, the way you think, the way you're growing up, it's all different to the way I've experienced those. My life has been different to your life, and that should influence the way you approach your DJing, approach your mixing. And I think when you start looking at it from that perspective, you could then start really, looking for moments to make things simpler. Finding moments where you just no need to have anything there. Finding moments where simplicity is key. You have the tension, you have the heavy metal, but you can also have the lo-fi, the minimalistic, the atmospheric moments.
Over me, I can hear your whisper in my ear. The ocean is bleeding, it's taking me down. I'm falling, you're watching me fall.
Okay, and then we're arcing back to what we talked about before. So we're still giving an answer. So we're still giving a call to what we're doing. We still haven't given a resolve. So we're still creating that ever, infinite loop of progressing and building and building and building and building until we finally bring it to a close later in the mix. So let me stop there. I know I'm getting a bit philosophical here, but music is such a subjective art. And it's the very interesting art because you don't necessarily have the ability to put it up on the wall like you do a painting, right? It's such an audio interpretation of art, and we can create visual representation for that music. But again, it's not the music, right? When you do a painting, it's the painting. We don't create like a secondary thing to support the painting. Like you might have a cool frame around it, but it's the painting. That's the art. That's it. For music, it's like, okay, what are you going to do? Put like the artwork. Again, that's secondary to the actual music. And that's something I've always struggled with because the visual arts have always had much more of a rich and valued scene for what's created, and it's very, very well respected and looked into and all that. Well, you have to become a great master at it. Well, when we look at music, you don't necessarily have to have great skill. It's very much a sort of charlatan environment where you can have a bunch of people that can't really sing or mumble things or whisper things and can have great success, and you have other people create the work for them and they're regarded as the artist. And that's something that takes time to change. It's something that it's like a loophole that's been found in the sort of music industry. I mean, it doesn't make much sense to me if you look at if you look at a painting, look at Picasso, it's almost like, okay, it's like someone sitting instead of Picasso, and Picasso sort of saying, okay, I want you to do that and do that, but it's not Picasso actually drawing the work. Then you have like another person who comes in and like does the sketch. Then you have a third person who actually does the painting. And then you have Picasso just like sitting here and just chilling. And then he comes in and puts a bit of sprinkle dust on the painting or laminates it and then puts up on the wall and is like, yes, that's my work. But anyway, that's getting off topic. Yeah, but it's an interesting, it's an interesting discussion, interesting thing to talk about. But that's just the way it is. It's the reality of the music industry. It's the reality of all the space that we live in music. And I think a big part of that is that there isn't much education. It's a very murky area, and I think that for like a lot of very different areas, there's very little understanding in what exactly is happening. I hope that bringing it back to this, I hope that one element, the motivation behind the series is that to really sort of give you behind the scenes and educate a little bit more about what is happening behind the scenes. Because I feel that the sort of DJing space is quite murky. There's a lot of curtains around it, and it doesn't need to be. Yeah. Okay, anyway, so there you go. Some really cool ideas, some really cool things to think about. The core thing here is be confident in the skills that you have and work with them. And sometimes simplicity is key. Sometimes going crazy with effects is key. Again, you do you. That's the most important thing. No one can do you. You can be a copycat and you can try and be like everyone else, but no one's gonna be you. No one's gonna do it the way you do it. Okay? And that's, if you take one thing away from this breakdown, it's that. Yeah. Be confident in being who you are. Okay? Awesome. I hope you enjoyed my Tom Cruise sort of slide back. I will perfect the slide a little bit better. What was that song again? How'd it go? Like old town rock and roll. Yeah. Kind of music just soothes the soul. Like that old town rock and roll. Yeah. That's it. See ya.